So propagation, making new plants from old, usually for free, in my opinion, is fun. Seeds, cuttings, dividing, and layering are 4 very common, very easy ways to get new plants from old. And I've done all of these. There are other odd ways of getting new plants, but those are highly technical, done in nurseries with different kinds of cell division. But these are all normal things. So seed starting. So you can do seed starting outdoors when it's warm enough. And for certain seeds, you can do it outdoors even in the winter because they don't need extra heat. But you can also start seeds indoors and have a very controlled environment like this. I have set up like this where I've used PVC pipes to make a little stand. You can pay for a very expensive stand, or you can just make yourself a little stand. And then you have some grow lights, and you can just get some simple grow lights at Home Depot or something like that and hang them. You want a full spectrum light, not you'll use fluorescent bulbs, but they'll be full spectrum light. And you can do your own seeds very easily, and you can start your own tomatoes, your own heirloom tomatoes. Usually in January, you can start all kinds of seeds this way. It's very satisfying. In this picture over here on the right, you can see that there is a heat mat underneath because certain seeds, like tomatoes for instance, like to have it very warm. They like it to be almost as high as 80 degrees. And so if you don't keep your house that warm, you might want to provide a heating mat like this underneath. I've also heard you can put it on top of your hot water heater. But you don't want these seeds to be in the dark once they sprout. They can be in the dark until they sprout, but the moment they sprout, they should have light.
24 hours?
No. So she's asking, 24 hours? No. But they just need to have a diurnal light, which would be good. I usually put my lights on a timer, 12 hours on, 8 off. So does that come out right? No. That is not right. Okay, so math was never my strong suit. I give them 8 hours of darkness, and the rest is light. You do the math. Okay. So, but I do just put it on a timer so that that's handled normally. And they do have, because they're plants, they're used to the sun. Let's see, if you allow them to sprout without any light, they are going to be etiolated, which is a fancy term for stretched out and weak, and they'll never be good plants. So you definitely don't want that. Let's see, I'll do a demonstration. Actually, I can do a demonstration right now for seeding if we have some lights. So let's do a quick demonstration for seeding. So in terms of seeding, what I suggest is you can use any kind of recycled pot. So I have all these little 4-inch pots that I had around the house, and that works great. I can put them in a flat. You can put 16 in a flat. And because there are diseases that can be spread from old soil and old plants and whatnot, I wash these pots out and in a bleach solution, and so they're nice and clean now. So for seed starting, I recommend just using a decent potting soil that is, I wouldn't use regular garden soil that's out of your garden, only because there are going to be a lot of seeds in there already that you don't know what they are. So if you just buy a potting soil or a potting mix, it is already sterile. It doesn't have any weed seeds in it. So we're just going to do a quick putting some potting soil in here. It helps if the potting soil is already slightly moist. If you have an old bag in your garage and it's become very dry, it's hard sometimes to wet it, so put it in a bucket of water and get it wet enough so that when you water, the water doesn't just go down the sides of the container. All right, so now we have some potting soil in here, and we're going to do a little seeding, and you can grow all kinds of seeds. In this case, I have some large seeds. These are lupin seeds. They're pretty big. And I would say that the bigger seeds, generally, I put them directly in the ground. But little seeds, I like to put in a pot because then I can keep an eye on them. Because if you put little seeds in the ground, it's hard to find them later. You know, you're not even sure which plants they are. So in this case, I have a little package of relatively small seeds. These are lettuce seeds. And I want to show you a quick technique that you may use sometime. That if you hold it like this and you use your finger to tap like that, you can actually make the seeds walk out one at a time. Now you're too far away for me to actually show it, but it does work. Even for little seeds like little poppy seeds or anything, I am tapping, and you can do it's very interesting. I mean, I've used this over and over again, but there's one seed. People in the front probably could see that. One seed. One more seed. I mean, and these are little seeds, so you just very carefully, there's another seed. I mean, isn't that interesting that you could actually do that? Otherwise, you're going to end up with like 50 seeds, and they're not going to grow well because they'll all be on top of each other. So the smaller the seed, the less you're going to cover it with. The bigger the seed, a little bit more depth of soil on top. You can sift your soil if your soil is a little coarse. You can sift it for the part that goes on top. In a little pot like this, I'm just going to put not too many. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's arbitrary, but I don't want them to be too close together because then I have to, when they grow, I'm going to have to transplant them out of this pot anyway. This is just a starting pot. Okay, so now they're in there. I'm going to tamp them down a little bit so they don't move when I water. And then I'm going to very, very carefully, and like I said, you could sift this to have a very fine texture. And this is a technique I use in the garden as well. So I'm just going to show you what it looks like this. When I'm doing in the garden, I put two hands together and I go back and forth. And I move my hands back and forth, and it's coming out very small, very thin, until I have put a little bit of a layer across the seeds, all like that. Just not too much because they're small, and they have to be able to make it to the surface. Yes?
If you do that kind of layer and you're starting them outside, do you ever have issues with birds?
Yes, birds will eat your seeds, sure. Put a screen over it. Yeah. Birds can eat your seeds. Also, they can dry out outside. They can really dry out if it's in the summertime. So a row cover, which is like a very light fabric, laid over your seed bed will keep the birds out, the cats out, and it will keep the soil from drying out so much. And you can water right through the row cover. You can just water on top. And the only thing wrong with a row cover, honestly, is you have to look underneath to see what's going on. I mean, but if you have the row cover on it and it's not staked down too tightly, but it should be staked loosely, then you can actually have the plants grow up underneath it, and they will just lift the row cover up. So they're pretty much protected quite a bit. So that's just a seeding technique. So a small seed like that should have probably no more than 1/8 of an inch of soil on top. A big seed, like a pumpkin seed, can have 1 inch of soil on top, even 2 inches, and it can still make it to the surface. Big seeds, as I said, generally should just go directly in the ground because they grow so fast. They will their root will start to circle in your pot before the seed leaves are even very big. So I do a lot of seeding. I save seeds. I think it's really a fun thing to do. Some seeds are very, very easy to sprout. Bigger seeds are easier to sprout. Who has questions about seeding? Yes.
Do you recommend soaking any or all seeds overnight before you plant?
Okay. The question is, do I recommend soaking seeds overnight before planting? No. And the only reason is I will say this, some seeds benefit from soaking overnight. Corn seed will come up faster if you soak it overnight. Sweet peas will come up faster overnight if you soak them. But my reason for not soaking them is I never know exactly how many I'm going to need until I'm done. And then I've soaked too many and then they rot, or I don't have enough soaked and then now I have part of the row is not soaked. So that's why I don't do it. But if you soak them, and also I get distracted easily. So if I soak them overnight and then I can't get to it for 3 or 4 days, then they've rotted. So I don't soak. But you do have to have moist soil to get things to germinate. Sweet peas aren't a problem because you're planting them in October, in theory, and they should sprout from the rains. I don't even water seeds, sweet pea seeds. I don't even plant them. They just plant themselves from last year's crop. But corn isn't like that. Other questions about seeds?
So I have lupin and poppy seeds that I'm going to put in.
Okay.
And I've never tried that before.
Mm-hmm.
But do I do it after it starts raining or before?
So good question. She wants to put in California native wildflower seeds, and now is the right time to do it for sure. So if you plant them before it rains well, like if you do it now and then it doesn't really rain very well and soak the ground thoroughly, then you have to add water, because once you start the process, you got to be committed to it. You know, once they start to germinate, they must get some moisture. They can sit there dry for a long time. Like if you want to just throw them on the ground and step back, you're fine. You know, the rains are going to bring up a bunch of those, both the lupin and the poppies. You can also do something called seed balls, which is a really cool thing. You can take clay and mix it with some compost, and then mix it with seeds and make little balls and dry them. And then you can just sort of toss them where you want them. Yeah, but always in a responsible way. Anyway, so what I wanted to say is that that's a good technique for getting seeds out there that have their own little bit of compost with them, and they already have a little bit of soil around them, and they're protected from birds, and so it's a good regeneration technique, and you can throw them further. Yeah. Other questions about seeds? So, who here has grown seeds? About half. Mm-hmm. I encourage you. It's really fun. Yeah.
I've tried growing coriander seeds multiple times, and I'm not sure whether the seeds get eaten or the plants
Mm-hmm.
get eaten, but I rarely ever.
Okay. What time of year are you planting the coriander?
I've tried different times.
Mm-hmm.
In a little cooler
Mm-hmm.
weather, summer.
Mm-hmm.
I
Okay, so she's asking about coriander and saying she's not having a lot of success. So first of all, coriander happens to be the same thing. Coriander is the dried seed of cilantro. So what she's wanting is fresh cilantro. So the most important thing to know about cilantro is that it is a cool season annual. Just like basil is a warm season annual, and you plant it to catch the warm season and then it dies by the end of when it freezes. Cilantro is the opposite. It likes cool season to germinate and grow and be bushy, and it won't bloom until the warm season. So you'll get a lot more leaves if you plant it now. Plant it heavily. That's what I say. Plant cilantro heavily, because it's one of those parsley family things, and they don't germinate that well. So plant the cilantro heavily, and it doesn't matter if they're crowded. You're not making a root. You're not like carrots. You can't plant heavily, but cilantro you can. Yeah, and it may be a combination of birds and germination problems, but just plant heavier. Other questions? Yes. What are you wanting to sterilize? You don't have to sterilize old soil. Basically, what I'm talking about is I'm sterilizing these pots because I'm going to do cuttings. Cuttings are very vulnerable to rotting. Seeds are not very susceptible to rotting if you don't overwater. Seeds are designed to succeed. Most seeds, very successful. The only reason I'm really sterilizing these is because of possible fungal diseases that would affect cuttings. So in general, I don't sterilize soil. I reuse soil all the time. If I am doing cuttings, I will be more careful. Other questions? Seed starting questions? Okay, so we're going to move to whatever's next. So another way to get plants is division. I don't know that you have to have the, I'm going to show you an example of doing division, a couple of examples. So what you're going to do is when you have a plant that has a lot of basal sprouts, one example would be, one very good example is irises. So these are German bearded irises. And I had to really find a clump because it was so dry that they kind of declined. But anyway, so this is a clump of irises, which really should be divided about every 3 years if you want them to bloom well. And the simple way to do this is to dig up your clump of irises and then just break them apart. And that is called division. So basically, I'm just going to tear them apart like this. And I'll shake off some dirt so you can see what they look like underneath. So here are some roots. Here are 2 pieces of iris. We're going to take off the dead leaves, which will be on the outside. So that's just a tidying technique you do every year anyway. And then you just break these apart. Now these 2 are growing together, but with your fingers, you just make a wish. They each will have roots, and this part is the old part of the iris that isn't really needed anymore, and sometimes it's kind of rotted, so I usually just remove that. Now, it's got a little fresh break. You can let it sit and dry or callus off for a day or 2, and then you just replant them.
Does it need to callus off?
The question is, does it have to callus off? I want to give you the best advice, so it probably would be wiser, but I never do it. Yes?
Is right now an okay time to do that?
Yes. Now is a fine time to do irises. The best time is after they bloom, and usually iris gardens all divide all their irises in July and August. So it's not too late yet. But anytime from July and August on is a fine time to divide these irises so that you will get lots of more irises and better blooming. And when you plant them, you're basically just planting them back to where they were, like this. Sometimes it's sideways. Yes, yes. They kind of grow sideways-ish. Yes. So does this apply to native irises, which are not the same at all as German bearded irises? I'm going to treat those a little differently. Yes?
How long can they be dry in the roots?
How long can they sit out of the ground? They can sit out of the ground an astonishing long time, months even. They will decline in quality and they will shrivel, but as long as they still have a bit of green on them and a little bit of firmness, they'll still be okay. I don't recommend that because you'll get a much faster growth, better iris if you do it sooner. But they have a lot of ability to withstand, hang around for a while. So, yes.
So I have quite a few irises, and they haven't been doing that well. But part of it is that I have really terrible clay soil. So what would be a good added?
Sorry, I'm trying to make this actually not make so much weird noise. But I'm too hot to keep wearing a sweater. It's very warm in here, at least if you're standing up and talking. Okay, so you're asking about amending soil. Well, first of all, I want to say that irises, I was going to say something about irises. They don't like shade. German bearded irises will not grow well in shade, so that would be one reason they don't bloom. To amend soil, it's a big topic. It's another whole topic. But if you're worried about your soil not having enough good drainage, I would add compost. I would just remove those irises, dig in some compost, and go ahead and replant. Compost is generally the answer to every question. You know, it's sort of like, how do I make the soil hold more water? If it's sandy soil, add compost. How do I make the soil drain better? If it doesn't drain well, add more compost. It's better than, I wouldn't add gypsum, I wouldn't add sand. Those are ways to make concrete. I would just add compost, you know, good living compost. And if you have plants that you can't add it, you can't mix the soil in, you know, but you can't mix it with the soil because the plants aren't coming out, you can add it to the surface. And you can also add mulch, which will also decompose and also improve the soil that way, from the top down. Short answer, yeah.
Does that same thing apply to orchids?
No, orchids are a little different. They're a real different thing, and I don't even pretend that I'm good at orchids, so I'm not going to go there. Yes? Dahlias. Okay, well, dahlias have, you talking about the big dinner plate dahlias or the little bedding plant dahlias? So the big ones. Generally, people dig them every year and divide them. And you do divide them kind of like breaking them apart, and then you regrow the roots. You know, separate them out. And yes?
What's the best time to do that?
Oh, you would do that at the end in the fall. They're going to look, when they're finished blooming and starting to freeze and look crummy, that's when you would dig them up. Anytime between then and December, I think, is. And you just break them apart. Yeah, you're going to keep the. Who's a dahlia breeder or fan? Yes? Somebody who knows about dahlias. This is an area where I have some dahlias. And the little bedding ones, I just leave in the garden, and they just keep coming back. And I'm not exactly sure, but I know you could find that out from somebody who actually knows dahlias, not me. Yes?
Canna.
Oh, cannas? In general, cannas are not taken out of the ground very often, but you can divide them the same way. You just shovel, prune them, pull them out, divide them, separate them, put them back in the ground. Yeah. Daylilies also can be divided the same way. Just dig up the thing and then start to break it apart. In fact, let me do this native iris, and it's very similar to a daylily. All right, I'm sorry that there isn't really, like some of you are far away, but you can either come closer or stand up. Okay, so I think what we're going to do is, this is a California native iris. And what we're really looking for is, at this time of year, very specifically, they're going to start to regrow. They're kind of dormant all summer long. And this is an iris that's different from German bearded irises in that they grow in dry shade. And they really don't need much water. Well, neither needs much water, but they're kind of dormant in the summer. So I'm going to knock this out. And we have a little ant colony in here. If I start hopping around, it's because they're running up my arm. Okay, so I'm going to take off some of the soil at the top here. And I'm going to check and see, because what I'm really looking for is on these some kind of red new growth at the base of all the leaves. Okay, yeah, and there it is. So I can see that it's kind of red down here. And I'm going to want to break this apart in a couple of clumps. And because it's pretty well rooted, I'm going to have to be a little bit brutal with the roots. Sorry, honey. You can be as brutal as a shovel down the middle. Or you can take a pruning shears and kind of cut the ones that are sort of still attached to each other. All right. I'm going to hold this up so you can see what I'm kind of doing. So I want to pull these apart. See, 2 plants where there were only 1 before. And by the time I'm done, there will be more than 2. But in this case, I'm going to take a lot of the potting soil off because just because it's going to happen. And I'm going to gently tease them apart. Okay. So this looks like I could yet divide it into two more right here. And what I'm looking for is to get some roots on each side. And that's why I'm being kind of careful. And you can't see this, but there are ants crawling all up my arms. Okay, so here's a new little plant, and it looks pretty healthy. And if you plant this right now, it'll do very well. It will probably be as big as this other plant by the end of spring. Yeah.
Does it have to have a big hole and make room for all those roots?
Oh, no. A big hole. So this plant is going to be, no, it's not a super big hole. I mean, I don't want the roots to be all shoved like this in the hole. So the hole should be a little bit bigger. What are we doing? Are we showing? Trying. Some people can't see. I don't know if this helps. But we have divided this little iris into a couple of different little plants. And of course, it'll like it better if you put it into a hole with some compost mixed in with the clay soil. But these are designed to grow in native soil here. Yeah? Oh, in this case, no fuss, no dirt. What I'm going to do is very quickly, I don't want this to sit out in the sun, I don't want it to be dry, but very quickly I'm going to replant this. I mean, if I was doing this at home. But to replant it, I would just, create kind of a hole, and I would spread the roots out so that they're not all in one place. And I would tamp the soil back down around the plant and water it in well. That's the one thing you want to do, is water it in well to get all the air spaces out of it. And then you're not going to keep it continually moist. You're going to want to check it, because soil should always have some air and some water. So it should dry out a little bit. But if you're planting it in native soil, it won't dry out really fast. So this happens to be a cultivar called Lavender Thrills or Lavender Frills, something like that. So it's a really pretty iris. I'm just going to leave it here, and I'm fairly certain we'll just raffle these pieces off. Okay, let's see. Okay, switch me back. Yes. So you do this about now. So what you're looking for is that new growth right before, anywhere I would say between late fall, winter to early spring, you'll see the little bit of new red growth on these native irises, and that's the time to do it. So this is a heuchera, which is coral bells. And I could do exactly the same thing with this coral bells, but I think you've got the point of how you do it. And so I'm not going to keep doing divisions. You click this here. So this is you do the same thing. Oops, going the wrong way. I apologize. So you're dividing them into little pieces. Strawberry plants you can do this with too. And then you just put them in a nice little potting soil. And these are other things that are very easy to divide, Different grasses, because they clump. Daylilies, same thing. Carex, sedges, yarrow, lamb's ear. All these are easy to divide. I would say a lavender, not easy to divide at all, because it really only has one trunk. It's not the kind of plant you're going to divide. So we do something different with things that can't be divided. This is an example of those native irises that I just showed you. There's a big clump, and then you just dig up the clump, and you'll see, this isn't a great picture, but you'll see that they have the little bit of red new growth at the base. You can cut them back if you're doing a very severe dividing many pieces. You can cut them back like that. Yeah. Oh gosh, well, you can't divide anything with one trunk. It's not going to divide. It'll be things that if you dig around in the soil, it looks like they have a lot of suckers. Yeah. Or a clumping thing, clumping grasses, clumping daylilies, clumping irises, those can be divided. Oh yeah, you can see. Layering. All right. So I'll do a quick thing on layering. So layering is another way to make new plants from old. And if you have very flexible stems like this sage does, you can take a stem, and this is so interesting. You can take a stem and you can put it in the ground, and you can put a hairpin on it or something, or a stake, and bring the other end up, and it will form roots right where it is in the ground. And then when it has a nice little clump of roots, you just cut it off, and now you have a new plant. And that's called layering.
All sages?
All sages layer like crazy. They actually will do it naturally. Almost every sage will do that naturally. Evergreen currant will do that. You can see how it is working, and then you just cut that little piece off. Rosemary can do that. You take a long, flexible stem of rosemary, and basically what you're doing is you're taking a piece of that stem and putting it under the ground, but it should still have a little bit of green on the other side coming up, the growing tip. So this part is under the ground. Can you see that? That part. And you can use a stick, a hairpin, a stake, anything, and then it should be moist. It won't grow. It won't do it in the dry. Yes.
Does that work with lantana?
Lantana would work also. Yes. Yeah, you could do that with lantana also. They would also layer. So these are all ways to get new plants from old. This is an evergreen currant. It's a California native plant that arches very much and has a beautiful fragrance on the leaf, and that one layers like very easily. Dutchman's pipe, a vine that also, if it's running on the ground, it will root down where it's running, and you can layer it. And now we're going to talk about cuttings. So cuttings, why would you take cuttings faster than seed? Because you're already going to have a little plant. It will be an exact duplicate of the plant. Seeds, of all the techniques I just mentioned to you, seed is the only sexual way of producing plants, and everything else is cloning. So layering, cuttings, division, those are all cloning, and you get an exact copy of the original plant. So bottom heat can help, and it says 1 part peat and 5 parts perlite. And I want to adjust that a little bit. So let's see. So easy plants for taking cuttings are lavenders, sages, geraniums, coleus, mint, lots of things, willows. There are actually some woody things that you can take cuttings of in the winter, things like figs, grapes, willow, dogwood. All of those are very easy to make cuttings of. All right, so I think I'm going to do a demonstration. Let's see what we have here. So the materials that you need for cuttings is you need the plant material that you want to reproduce, pruners or a sharp knife, and some pots of pre-moistened, soilless rooting medium. And it helps if you have a rooting hormone. Not everything needs it, and if you have a really green thumb, you can probably do it without. But rooting hormone it's a naturally plant-produced hormone that causes the plant to make roots. So it's very helpful. And I'll show you, I'll just demonstrate how to do it. All right. So there are all different things that you can use in a soil mix that you are going to root cuttings in, but mostly what you want is to make sure you have no diseases in it. So you don't want to, and you want it to drain really well. You don't want it to stay soggy and wet like rooting in water, for instance, because that's when diseases come. Yeah?
Can you explain why potting soil is called a soil less?
Yeah, sure. So potting soil that you buy in bags doesn't really have any dirt in it. It is made up of forest products. Sometimes it has, compost. Sometimes it has perlite in it, which is a mineral, a white mineral that is mined. It's those little pieces of white stuff. There's some in this one even. And It might have peat moss in it. It might have vermiculite in it, which is another mine material. So it doesn't really have any dirt in it.
So does that mean potting soil is not a good choice to transplant when you're putting a small plant that grew into a larger pot? I always thought it was what you should put them in, potting soil.
Yeah, so potting soil is great for pots. Potting soil is wonderful for pots. It's lightweight, it's sterile, at least at first, so it doesn't have any seeds in it. It's not, when I say lightweight, that's important when you have pots, and especially for nursery stock, if you're moving a lot of pots around, you don't want them to weigh 10 pounds. You want to be able to ship them. And so potting soil was developed for exactly that reason. It's light, it drains well, it's predictable. So a small plant to a bigger plant, still use potting soil. Moving to the soil is another matter. And sometimes there's a terrible interface problem between that fast draining, that lightweight potting soil and your heavy clay soil. And there will be a line kind of between them, and water will not pass. And so that's why you want to rough up the edge of the potting soil. You want to get the roots out into the real soil. You want to do a little mixing. Yeah. For that reason, and you want to water right there and make sure your plant doesn't dry out. Okay, where were we? We're doing cuttings, right? Okay, hi. That's a little eerie, by the way. Okay, rooting powder. So this is a rooting hormone you can buy in any nursery, and this is a little powder, and it is a very low amount of rooting powder, and it works very well on plants that are easy to root. It has 10% of indola 3 butyric acid, which is rooting hormone, okay? So it has 10% and the rest is 90%, I don't know, talcum powder or something. And then if you really get into it, you can get a liquid which you can use in different concentrations, and you would use it more concentrated for things that are harder to root, sort of to kickstart them. And so you, in this one, which is Lily Miller Dip and Grow, it has the same product, but you would use it straight or dilute it 20 times, depending on whether, how much you really need it. But in general, this is all you're going to need. Rootone. Rootone is a common brand name. This one is called Bone Tone or Bon Tone, but any rooting powder is probably just fine. Yeah.
As an alternative, could you use that vitamin B1 mixture that you see in gallons of, or
can you use vitamin B1 instead? Okay, so the vitamin B1 will not help you at all. That is not good for rooting. It doesn't have any kind of the hormone in it that you need. However, she asked also about willow trees. Willow trees will root if you breathe on them. They root like crazy. So willows have this natural hormone in the branches, and I have done this. You take a willow branch and you just scar up the bark, a green willow branch, cut it into little pieces, soak it in water, and now you have your own homemade rooting hormone. And so to use that, you would just take your cuttings. So we had these lavender cuttings, right? And you're going to make some cuttings out of these. And so you're going to take this little cutting and you're just going to soak it in that willow water for, I don't know, an hour or two. And it'll soak up, it'll drink up some of that willow water, which has that indolo 3 butyric acid in it, or something like that. You had a question?
I was going to ask you, you said big tree, and I was going to say, when you're using a tree branch, which branch do you use? A new growth thin one?
Oh, that's a good question. She's saying when you take a cutting from a fig branch or a grapevine or something woody, which part do you use? Do you use the little thin, fresh growth, or do you use a big honkin' woody piece? Use the woody piece. Yeah. Use the thicker one. It doesn't have to be like this, but it could be it should be as thick as your thumb, I think. And you don't want it to rot, you don't want it to just deteriorate, you want it to sprout. Yes?
Do you use the rooting powder the same as the willow? Wet it and soak in?
So she's asking, do you use the rooting powder the same as willow? Do you mix it with water or soak it? No. The liquid one you do, and you just sit the cuttings in it. But no, this powder, you just, you dip the end of the cutting into the powder, it sticks on it, and then you stick the cutting in the pot. So let's do that. So one of the things that I like to use, I always used to use, was a combination of vermiculite and perlite, because the vermiculite holds water really well. The perlite doesn't neither provide any nutrition, but all you're wanting to do is make roots. You don't want it to really grow, you just want it to make roots. So you're putting it in a rooting medium, and that I was using 50% perlite and 50% vermiculite. I stopped doing that when it became more difficult to find those materials, and also there was a problem with vermiculite that you should know about, and that even though it doesn't have asbestos in it, most vermiculite in the US was mined from a place in Montana, I think, Libby, Montana, that had asbestos in the soil. So a lot of vermiculite had asbestos associated with it. And so I stopped using it because you don't want to breathe that stuff, do you? So you can use just a regular fast draining potting soil. You can add perlite to it. I don't like to use sand because I think it gets it holds the water too much, actually. You want it to drain quickly. So I'm going to use, in this case, I'm going to use potting soil, but you, like I said, you can use a combination of other things. Cuttings. So the main thing with creating cuttings is you don't want too much leafy material because it will wilt. Remember, this plant doesn't have any roots yet, and so it will tend to wilt. And so everything we're going to do is going to try and keep it from wilting. So when we take the cuttings, we stick them as soon as possible in moist soil. We don't let them sit out like I just did for about an hour. So an example of this would be you would cut this, and we'll just make a fresh cutting, right? So we're going to take a fresh cutting. We're going to remove the lower leaves, at least 2 nodes. And when I say nodes, that would be the leaves and the buds that could break from where the leaves are. So we're going to remove the leaves, and you can use a pruning shears or you can strip it off if you're not tearing it too much. You're going to leave a little bit of leaves at the top. It's like, oh, good, too high. There. I just put it off the screen. So you're going to leave a few leaves. If you have too many leaves, or the leaves are big, like if you were doing something that had big leaves like geraniums, feel free to cut the leaves in half, just like that. Like with geraniums, I always cut the leaves down because you don't want too much leaf surface or it will wilt. So you don't want to cause too much stress on this tiny little cutting. The cutting should be about 3 inches. If you have very big internodes, that means the spaces between the buds, in order to get 2 buds below the surface, you might have a bigger, longer cutting, depending on the kind of plant. Yeah, I don't have anything that I could really show you with. But you get what I'm saying. You want 2 buds below the surface and then the rest of the leaves above the surface. Now, the next thing you're going to do, this soil should be relatively moist already. It shouldn't be so dry because once you water it, you want it to water to go through easily. So if I was really a heathen, like I sometimes am, I would just stick the cutting in here. But really, that's not the best practice because what if there is a disease on here and now you're putting it into your rooting powder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of this powder wherever on earth I left my little tiny cup, which I do not know right now in this moment. Here it is. It's right in front of me. Okay, so I'm going to put a little bit of powder in here. Can you see that? So a little bit of powder in here. And I'm going to stick the cutting in the powder until there's powder on the base of the cutting. So can you see that? I can't tell. There. Okay, so now there's some powder in the cutting. Now, if I was to stick this cutting right into the soil, all the powder would come off. So I'm going to use a pencil or a chopstick to make a hole. And so I'm going to make this hole, and then I'm going to put the cutting in it like that. And then I'm going to tamp the soil around, and I have my first cutting. A 4-inch pot like this can probably take 4 or 6 cuttings. So you don't have to just do one per pot. So we'll do several cuttings, and we'll just put them all in there like that. So once again, this one probably has a little bit too many leaves, so I'm going to cut some of those leaves down. And this is exactly how they do it in the nurseries. This is how all these plants were probably grown. These were probably, none of these were seed-grown plants. They were probably all cutting-grown plants because it's faster. And so, so she's asking, do they get weaker through the generations because of that? Yes and no. No, the individual plants are just as strong as the first one. That doesn't create a problem. But with any kind of monoculture where you end up with only one kind of plant all the time, they can be susceptible to diseases. So like if you were to have, so I'm going to make another one. I'm going to make a hole, stick it in, tamp it down, and that's it. Okay, so we're going to have some of these. Yes?
You have to have a growing tip on each cutting.
You have to have a growing tip on every cutting, and you have to have some space below the surface that has some nodes or places. Yes, yes. To make it really work. There's some other tips here that are important. We don't want this to dry out. So we're going to make a mini greenhouse out of something that is free. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a little mini greenhouse. If you have a real greenhouse, that's fine. But we're going to make a little mini greenhouse like this. The first thing we need to do is make sure there's a few holes in our plastic bag. I'm not exactly sure how to do this, but I think something like this. Okay, so now you want some holes in the plastic bag. You don't want it to be really tight around the plastic, around the thing, because you're watering it, which I don't have water up here, but I would water this first, and then I would put this over it, and I would make it a little bit loose. And the reason is if you don't, it's going to rot. You're going to have fungal diseases in there, and you want the proper combination of moisture in the air, but not so much that everything rots. And so after watering it, you put this in a place that has indirect light, not direct sun, because that is going to heat it up. And also, the whole purpose of this is not to make this little lavender green stuff grow. We want is the roots to grow. Now, the roots will do something underneath that you aren't going to be able to watch unless you keep pulling them up and looking at them, which I've done. Are you rooted yet? The first thing they're going to do in the first week or so is they're going to create a callus, a literal callus around the base. And it looks kind of white and lumpy. And then after that, the roots will grow from the nodes and from the base. These are the places where most of the roots will grow. And once you have a nice little clump of roots, you can transplant that into a little 4-inch pot and move it into a little bit better location for a little more light. You can take it outside, you can water it and whatnot. I still wouldn't put it right directly in full sun because it's still a baby. This can take weeks. Yeah, this can take weeks. So I like to do this. I like to do this outdoors on my patio where it's shaded. I just think it's a little bit nicer. I can do it indoors, but I like a little bit more light, than indoors. Yes.
How about the collapsible plastic greenhouses that you can get pretty inexpensively online?
How big are they? Or what are we talking about? Yeah, so you can definitely use a collapsible or real greenhouse, but the truth is, depending on how many, like if you're doing 100 cuttings, yeah, get something bigger. 100 bags, that's going to be a pain. But if you're just doing a few things here and there, you have a certain plant you want to reproduce, then I would just make it easier on yourself. Yes?
When you make the cutting, is it an angle or is it perpendicular?
So when you make this cutting, you don't have to make it straight or perpendicular or at an angle or anything like that. What sometimes if you have a bigger, woodier cutting, like maybe you are doing manzanitas, you might do it at an angle to give it a little more surface to suck up water. But in general, for things like lavenders, sages, and whatnot, you don't bother. There is something else I wanted to tell you about, and that is that one of the first thing you do when you're doing one of these, and I guess I'm just going to take one. To take a cutting off of something with flowers or seeds, you always take the flowers and seeds off. Because in the natural world, seeds and flowers always trump roots. The plant will always try and make the seed first, and that will take away the energy from the roots. So in this case, we have to take the flowering part off completely. And now we just have a little cutting. It goes in two directions, but that's okay. I think I'm going to take the leaves off here at the base, and then I'm going to, and I might, because this is in the flowering mode, prune each of the new tips, because I really don't want any flowers or attempted flowers in this process. I really only want this plant to have leaves when I plant it, and stem and roots. So this is it. This is how it's going to go. And then you could just put it in here. You can mix different ones, but I wouldn't. In general, I would keep all the sage cuttings in one pot and all the lavender ones in another pot, because they will grow at different rates. Yeah?
So I was looking at your cutting, about how long of a cutting do you need to be below the surface?
So it only needs, she's asking, how long does it have to be, the stem part to be below the surface? It really only has to be long, 2 nodes, 2 buds, ideally. And if you only had 1, okay, that's the way it is. But 2 nodes is better. And that could be 1.5 inches or so, yes.
Will this technique work for trees? And so, what's the time?
So you can also do trees. Some trees are best done by seed and some by cutting. Let me give you an example. Chinese pistache. Almost all Chinese pistache in the nursery trade are planted by seed. You can gather a lot of that seed and you can sow hundreds and thousands of seeds, and you just take all the seedlings and you grow them up. But if you want a male plant that does not have a male Chinese pistache that doesn't have seeds, there is one cultivar called Keith Davy, and it's a male cultivar with good fall color, and so that one is always grown from cuttings. You would use, in the winter, probably a small cutting, smaller than my finger, I think. There are whole books on how much, what material, when to do it, different kinds of plants if you really get into it, but just start with the easy plants and do what I'm saying here. But when you start to do trees, you need more rooting powder. You might need more bottom heat. You might need, there are certain plants that need certain other things that, that will make this more ideal for them. So, yeah. Fruit trees are almost all grafted, and so they don't do it exactly like this. Like citrus trees that are grafted, what they do is they take the cutting of the top, say it's a Valencia orange, and the rootstock, which is something that they want that grows well in the soil, better than an orange, but it doesn't have good fruit, and they join them together, they tie it up, and then they root that cutting. So they're rooting the rootstock, not the top. So it's fun. It's, if you get into it, there are all kinds of things you can do, but I just want to know that anybody can do really simple stuff like this. So, oh, we are almost out of time.
When we're still taking some questions, in case you guys didn't fill out a survey, Shelby and myself will be walking around because, again, we'll be doing drawings. So, again, we'll still take a few questions, but, again, we'll be collecting those.
Yeah, so if you would fill out the survey, we're going to do a raffle at this point. And the way the raffle works is fill out the survey. We're going to collect the surveys. You have to write on both sides and put a name. It doesn't have to be your name, but a name you'll recognize when I call it, up in the corner, right-hand corner. And then we will, the first person whose name is drawn gets to pick the first plant, and then the second person takes the second plant until all the plants are gone. I'll tell you about the plants too. Yes?
Is it better to take cuttings in the spring?
Oh, so the question is, better to take cuttings in the spring or fall? No, actually, it's probably better to take them when they're not about to bloom. Like, fall cuttings, I think, are better for most plants because you want them to be kind of mature, a little bit more mature. Not real soft wood cuttings like that will wilt, not so good.
So it doesn't need to have the hormones, the growth hormones in there?
You're going to add the hormones. You're adding the hormones, yes. Oh, you would, okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Layering, I think we can use also the hormone
Say.
in the fruit trees. That's what we're asking how to.
Oh, can you use fruit trees on the hormones on the fruit trees?
Air layering.
Air layering. Yeah, air layering is a little bit of a whole different topic that I didn't get into. Yeah. But air layering is when you kind of, I don't even want to get into it. Just look it up. Yes. Say it again. Succulents. Okay, here's a quick question on succulents. Super easy to reproduce. So this is an aeonium. I just cut it off this morning. This, you're going to love this. You cut this off, you stick it in the ground. You don't even need any rooting powder. So once again, it's better if you harden it off a little bit before you put it in the ground because this is soft tissue. But even a couple of days, just letting it sit out to dry out is just fine. And then you can put it in the ground. I have planted them very effectively without ever hardening them off. But that's because I don't water very much. So it's not really ever likely to do much rotting. So there are these aeoniums. And honestly, it's as simple as this. Right? So you can go out and ask your neighbors for some cuttings of your succulents and trade them back some and reproduce them that way. Yes?
You mentioned you were going to say something about citrus.
Citrus. What was I going to say about citrus?
If you can prune when, how.
Right. So citrus, because of the frost problems, you do not want to cut them back severely right before it freezes. That's another thing. But in general, citrus, I don't really, as I said, I don't really prune them very much. But, and they do bloom on new wood. And so if you're wanting to reduce the size of citrus, you could use that technique where you kind of take the longest branch and you cut that one off. I would do it, I do it in spring, I think, because it gives it a chance to regrow and then produce fruit and flowers. Yeah. After frost, after all frost. Yes. Anyone else? Okay, so we're going to wrap this up, and I'm going to talk about plants. I already told you that this was a lavender plant, and it is English lavender, 4 feet, about a 4-foot, very large plant. And I told you that this one was a California native. It's called California fuchsia, but it's not a fuchsia at all. It is actually, that's just the common name. And even though I brought this to show you that you do cut them back, don't cut this one back this year. Wait till next year to cut it back. And perfect, wonderful for hummingbirds. And it is a spreader. It will spread by runners. Yes?
Question of fuchsia that are in pots.
Real fuchsias?
Yeah, how do you prune them? Can you?
Yeah, they prune and they take cuttings very easily. Fuchsias are very easy to take cuttings from. Say that again. What technique to prune them? So what technique to prune fuchsias? So they're soft. They're soft. So you're basically looking at them and trying to shape them into a new shape. You know, so if they have long gangling branches, cut that back by 50% or so, and then just bring them back. They will re-sprout wherever you cut them. Monkey flower. Oh, oops. Potential cuttings. Yes.
When you talk about these, can you talk about shade?
Yes. So this monkey flower can take part shade or full sun. It will go somewhat semi-dormant in the summer. It's long blooming. It's about 1 to 2 feet wide, something like that, and tall. What else? Only moderate water. I'd say once a month watering is just fine. This is one of those big sages we talked about. It's this actually is this one. It has a name of maraschino. It blooms really, really well. It is going to be 4 feet tall by 8 feet wide. So definitely, if you have a big space, think about this. Hummingbirds do love it. Bees love it, and it can be cut back, sheared back, as she was asking. It is a salvia. It is an ornamental sage. This little plant is also a sage. This is a non-native sage called Rocky Mountain sage, but it is from South Africa. And it has kind of two-tone pinkish, dusty rose flowers, also very drought tolerant. It attracts hummingbirds. Let's see. I'm looking for the size because I haven't grown this one before. 36 inches by 24 inches, it says. You can't always trust them, right? You can't always trust it, but I would say at least 2 to 3 feet, probably pretty big. This is a manzanita. So this is a manzanita, and I brought it because I kind of wanted to show off that it's starting to already get that nice red peely bark. It has a nice structure. It's going to have many branches and eventually will be just a show-stopping tree bush. This one is called Howard McMinn, and it should grow about 7 to 8 feet wide and eventually that tall. But people think of it as a 3 to 5 foot shrub, but in my experience, it's a little wider than tall. And then this is a California native ceanothus. Everything here is drought tolerant. This is why I wanted to bring these. This one is called Valley Violet, so it's about 3 by 3 and needs full sun and has blue flowers. And this is a buckwheat, a California buckwheat. It even has a few of the flowers left on it. It is a fantastic pollinator plant, and it's low growing. And these flowers are almost finished, but they were white before, and then they turned to rust. And it will grow about 3 feet wide and be a nice ground cover. Drought tolerant. Oh, and then this one is a little showy parrot's beak. It grows well in containers, but it's very drought tolerant. It has just a very showy little flower. Yeah. You should probably look it up and practice on easy ones. The sage is going to be easy. Probably the epilobiums are easy, but I haven't done them. The lavenders are easy. This one I would just do by division. You can't take a single leaf of this and make it work.
What is that?
This is that coral bells, native coral bells. This is the island alum root. It needs part shade to really thrive, but this dry shade is just fine. So this one would take some shade, and the iris would take some shade. And even that succulent will take some shade, and everything else, this one can take a little shade. Everything else should really be in the full sun. I'll put the shade stuff on this side and the sun stuff on this side, and then we're going to draw. Got the surveys? That's where it is. Okay. I want to thank you all for coming and asking such good questions. Thank you. So.